All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm about 2 minutes early, so we're gonna wait and see if anybody pops in, and then we'll jump into the article. We're actually gonna end up doing this article in 4 or 5 parts because it's set up more like an interview. Um, so what I did is I went through it and I highlighted some key points that I want to, some key like little excerpts that I want to focus on. So in this first part, we're gonna read over some of the first little excerpts and we're going to go over some statistics that are included in the article. I'm getting over a cold, as you can probably tell from my voice. So I'm breaking it down because I don't really want to strain my voice by reading all this whole article at one time. So here we go. Um, Local law enforcement, prosecutors, and service agencies recently joined together to form the Alliance to Fight Human Trafficking in Southwest Louisiana. Lanyap columnist Dr. Michael Kurth sat down with representatives of these organizations to learn more about human trafficking in our area and how they intend to approach the problem. This forum will be published with two parts in Lanyap. Okay, so we're going to have a second part to this article. The first part deals with preventing human trafficking, and the second part will focus on the emotional and psychological recovery of the victims of human trafficking. And the title of the article is Human Trafficking in the Lake Area. I've dropped the link for the article in the description in case you want to read it for yourself. Read the full article, and also you can catch part two on their website. So, the first part that I have highlighted is from Dr. Michael Kurth, and he says, "Let me begin by explaining that human trafficking is a modern term for slavery. It refers to people being bought and sold as commodities and forced to do their owner's will. Slavery has been around for thousands of years and remains deeply embedded in many cultures. For example, Saudi Arabia did not formally abolish slavery until 1962, and Mauritania did so just 20 years ago. Thus, in many parts of the world, it is met with the shrug of the shoulders or a blind eye. So, it's a big deal to us here in the United States, but in many places, it's nothing to bat an eye at. I mean, it's kind of like the norm. And that's crazy because I can't imagine living in a place where human trafficking or slavery would be just an everyday thing, no sweat. Now, Gene Pittman says, in part, with human trafficking, the victims, those being trafficked, seldom report it and often deny it, which makes it difficult for law enforcement and prosecutors to determine if they are dealing with a sex crime or human trafficking. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase what I'm thinking about that. I'm kind of thinking along the lines of Stockholm syndrome, where a victim actually begins to align themselves with their abuser as a survival technique, and somewhere along the lines of the relationship between a pimp and a prostitute, where the pimp will beat the prostitute, take her money, do outrageous things to her, and she'll still stand by his side. And I want to say that possibly the denial and failure to report on the part of the victims is probably based a lot in fear of serious harm to themselves or to a loved one, a child, a parent, a sibling. Um, Fear of a change in circumstances. They've gotten used to at least having their basic needs met, and have probably been conditioned to believe that they wouldn't be able to survive if they left. You know, who's going to take care of you? Who's going to look out for you like I do or like we do, depending on the situation? Kind of a brainwashing situation. And kind of the same as like when you're in a domestic violence relationship and you're being abused, but you don't want to call the police. Um, in some cases, even getting angry with the police for attempting to arrest and initiate prosecution against your abuser, because you get to a point where this is the norm, this is what you're used to, this is what you've been programmed to believe is all you all you can have, that there's nothing beyond the walls of this box that you've been placed in. And then when it comes to human trafficking, and this is kind of outside of the article, but you get a lot of foreigners who've been smuggled into the country who are forced into servitude or slavery as a way to repay the debt for being brought into the country. Um, just on other things that I've read and watched, you know, that particular type of situation with people being smuggled into the country from other places, that can get really serious, like really intense, to the point where family members are murdered to force the person to repay this perceived debt for being smuggled into the country. And so I wouldn't I wouldn't doubt that some of the not foreigners, like people who have been kidnapped or abducted or sold into human trafficking by family members or other people, I would dare to say that some of that probably goes on in those situations as well. Fear is a very, very effective means of controlling someone. Dr. Michael Kurtz says, why do victims deny they are being trafficked? And Gene Pittman responds, to protect their traffickers. Familial human trafficking is what we've seen the most of here so far. So, mostly in Southwest Louisiana, they're seeing familiar human trafficking, family members selling family members into human trafficking and slavery. That is when family members sell their children to a sex trafficker in return for money, drugs, or something else of value. It generally comes to our attention in the form of some other crime or neglect, abuse, or what have you. So a lot of times it's not even coming to the attention of law enforcement for the crime that it is, but it's kind of like an aside or an included along with something else. Some other children are being abused, and so then that's how they find out that this one particular child is missing, because there's an abuse report uh, regarding other children in the home, or maybe someone gets caught up in drugs and gets busted, and that it comes to light that type of way. So a lot of times, from what I'm understanding, it's not even um, discovered as a crime because of the crime itself, but because of other things that may be at play. Since as the alliance moves forward and the people become more aware and more educated, you're going to find that we have an increase in all forms of human trafficking, not just child sex trafficking. Dr. Michael Kurth asks, is there a link between human trafficking and pedophilia? I didn't highlight this part, but we all know what it is, but I'm going to read it anyway. Anthony Celestine gives a definition. He says, pedophilia is a disorder where someone desires to engage in sexual activities with a prepubescent person. And what I have also learned, shout out to AFC Podcast, is that a hebephile is someone who is sexually attracted to not prepubescent children, but pubescent children, um, under the age of 18, but already in puberty. So 13, 14, 15, 17, 16, 18, that's a hebephile. Anyway, David Duplechain says, as Anthony said, the trafficker may not be a pedophile. It is the customer, the person buying the sex act, who may be a pedophile. The trafficker generally doesn't care. So the traffickers aren't the ones necessarily uh, abusing or taking advantage of these people physically and sexually. These people to them are just like a rancher buying cows. You know, you buy, you sell, you cultivate, you grow, you nurture for what you need, and not necessarily nurture. And that, I don't want to use that word because that nurture generally tends to have a positive connotation, but you condition for what you need to make a profit. So the trafficker is really only concerned about the money aspect of it. Doesn't care if they're young, old, fat, skinny, black, white, Asian, whatever. They're about the dollar, the bottom line, the dollar amount. And generally, the pedophiles or hebophiles or whatever other kind of files are out there, it's going to be the person who's buying the trafficked person. Dr. Michael Kerr says, as I understand it, human trafficking is a federal offense under the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which banned slavery, and it requires that the person be compelled or coerced into engaging in sex or some other labor for another person's gain. On the other hand, laws governing voluntary sexual activity, such as prostitution and underage sex, are state laws that differ from state to state. Now, I will say this. I wish that we had a more uniform set of laws dealing with especially underage sex. Because in some states, the age of consent is 16, some 17, some 18. Then you have states that have the Romeo and Juliet laws, and if they're this many years apart, then it's not a crime. But if they're that many years apart, then it's a crime. And some of these laws are active in some places, but not in others. There may be different variants and variations. And I think that if we had a more uniform set of laws governing underage sex, then we could begin to more effectively prosecute those who are taking advantage of underage people, taking sexual advantage of underage people. I think that if states had more uniform laws, not just the laws, but the punishments when someone is found guilty or takes a plea bargain, if we had more uniform laws and punishments for any of this activity, whether it's underage sex, whether it's rape, child molestation, whatever it is, if we have more uniform laws protecting the victims, more uniform punishments as a deterrent or potential deterrent for the offenders, then I think that we could more effectively uh, stamp out human trafficking, or at least make a better a bigger impact on that industry. Gene Pittman says yes, and that can make it difficult to prosecute human trafficking. But I want to reiterate that while human trafficking is significantly underreported, from the data we do have, human trafficking is on the rise in our community. We are on one of the busiest interstate highways in the country, located halfway between two of the largest cities. And we have a growing hospitality industry with our casinos. If you look at the Polaris Project's map of hot zones for human trafficking, all along the Gulf Coast is considered a hot spot. Now that I've known for years. The Gulf Coast is from the tip of Florida all the way around to Texas is it's a hot spot for human trafficking and for sex trafficking in particular because it's tourist spots. And just common sense says where you have more tourists, you have a higher likelihood of people being kidnapped, and there's no one there to immediately report it because they're on vacation. They're not expected to return home anytime soon. On top of that, there's a higher demand to provide these quote unquote services to people who may be visiting and who may be interested in um, procuring certain types of services that aren't quite legal, for lack of a better term. I'm trying not to set off YouTube's, I'm trying to be more conscious of how I phrase things, but anytime you have high traffic in and out of an area, it just stands to reason that you'll have more human trafficking because of the types of people that are coming and going, supply and demand, you know. Um, I know I was actually kind of surprised to find out that my hometown, Pensacola, was so high on the list of human trafficking hotspots. Um, One day soon here, I'm going to have Jimmy Staley come back on here and talk to us about that because she does a lot of research in that area and she has some very good facts and insights when it comes to human trafficking along the Gulf Coast. Just wanted to throw that out there for you. It may be next month when we do that or after the holidays, more than likely after the holidays because we are coming up to the holidays. Everybody's going to be busy and doing their thing and family and all that good stuff. But, okay, yeah, I'm going to try to find that Polaris project map so that we can look at it in the next installation of this series. But we're going to go over these numbers here real quick. It says the U.S. Department of Justice website lists the following nationwide statistics. A total of 2,198 persons were referred to U.S. attorneys for human trafficking offenses in the fiscal year 2020 and 62% increase from the 1,360 persons referred in 2011. So we see an upward trend in people who are engaged in human trafficking. The number, and that's nationwide, not just in Southwest Louisiana. These numbers are nationwide. The number of persons prosecuted for human trafficking increased from 729 in 2011 to 1,343 in 2020, an 84% increase. So again, we're seeing an upward trend. The number of persons convicted of a federal human trafficking offense increased from 2011, 464 persons, to 2019, 837 persons, before falling in 2020 to 658 persons. And even though that number fell in 2020, that is still a significant increase. That's about a 50% increase from 2011 to 2020. So there is still an upward trend. Of the 1,169 defendants charged in U.S. District Court with human trafficking in offenses in fiscal year 2020. Now we're going to get down to some more numbers. 92% were male, 63% were white, 18% were black, 17% were Hispanic, 95% were U.S. citizens, and 66% had no prior convictions. And those are some interesting numbers to me because if you pay attention to the way that mainstream media presents the human trafficking problem, I actually expected that the number of Hispanic persons involved or convicted would be higher. Um, I expected that the number of the percentage of females would be higher. Hey, Sleuth Mom. And I expected that the number of non US citizens would be higher because there's this like slant towards when it comes to human trafficking, they kind of just flat out they kind of make it seem like a Mexican thing, that they're really they're that a lot of human trafficking is coming from Mexicans, and so I expected the Hispanic percentage to be higher. The female percentage, I expected that to be higher because we see so many instances involving females as the perpetrators that it really kind of shocked me that it's only about 8% or less are females. Now, the one statistic that really stood out to me was 66% had no prior convictions. So, when we're talking about this human trafficking problem, we're not talking about, I'm good, I'm real good, I'm feeling a whole lot better, I'm back at it again. But they had no prior convictions. So these aren't the neighborhood drug dealers. Hey, Red Rock, these aren't the neighborhood drug dealers. These aren't the people who are in and out of prison. These are in jail. These aren't the people that you see getting arrested on Cops and these other shows like that. These are people with money, people in nice neighborhoods, people who have no prior convictions. They've never been in trouble. They probably never had a ticket. So it's the one that you would least expect. It's the opposite image that comes to your head when you hear human trafficking. You're thinking some dude with tattoos and, you know, barbed wire tattoos on his arms and face or whatever. And it's not them. It's white collar. It's white collar guys. It's it's doctors probably. From these descriptions, it could be the doctor, it could be the preacher, it could be whoever that you would least expect. Well, I'm going to quit straining my voice for tonight. We will pick up not tomorrow night, but the night after, which will be Wednesday night. And it's going to go into what about underage sex? And I will have some excerpts highlighted in that section for us to talk about. I don't think there's a whole lot of statistical information in that section from what I recall. No, there's not. So I will try to come up with some statistics or some good additional information on that. Um, we may look at a few laws from different areas that deal with underage sex because, as I said, I think if we had more consistent laws and punishments dealing with perpetrators who go after underage children, that we could make a much larger impact on the problem as a whole. Consistency. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna quit straight in my voice and I'm gonna get out of here for tonight. Yeah, Sleuth Mom, doctors, lawyers, judges, police. I've just read so many articles about police. There was one cop who got a 16-year-old pregnant. She went for a ride along with the police department, and he ended up grooming her and getting her pregnant. So it's not the people that you would think. And I will see you guys Wednesday night. Love you all. Good night.